Mr. Daniels waited for his guests to arrive, sitting patiently at the corner table of the diner. This diner was the most popular one in their tiny little town, so it shouldn't have been a problem for his guests to find this place. They were supposed to meet at 6 in the evening, which was already 6:05. I should cut the lads some slack, he thought. Not everyone is as punctual as you are. Just that moment, a young man wearing a black checkered shirt with rough blue jeans entered the cafe. His stubble beard made his blue eyes stand out even more. The girls in this town are going to fight over him, Mr. Daniels thought to himself. The young man looked around the cafe until he spotted his host sitting in the corner. He looked over at Mr. Daniels, waiting for some confirmation. He got this when Mr. Daniels nodded, asking him to come over. Hello, sir, the young man said, reaching out to shake his hand. Andrew Green, it's my pleasure to meet you. Hello, Andrew. Call me Ron. Being called sir or Mr. Daniels makes me feel old, he said, laughing at his joke. Andrew smiled, thinking he was lucky that Ron was more excellent than he expected. Please have a seat. Andrew complied and sat down. Thank you, Ron. This is a lovely little town you guys have here, he said, trying to start a conversation. It sure is, which is why we don't like to move to another place. Tell me now, what would you like to eat? Ron asked, asking the waitress to come over. Oh, nothing, I'm good. Andrew refused politely. Oh, nonsense. You're my guest, at least for tonight. From tomorrow, I'm going to begin charging you anyway, chuckled Ron. Andrew smiled and told the waitress to bring a club sandwich for him. The two men sat at their diner table, ate, and talked for 2 hours straight. Their conversation included everything from politics to sports, until they finally got down to discuss what they had come there to talk about. Andrew had contacted Ron in response to an ad he posted about looking for a paying guest. Living in a small town, it wasn't easy for Ron to find someone who would come here and pay for a living space. The only people living here were those born and raised here. But luckily, Andrew was just the type of person he had been looking for. For some reason, the young man had decided to move here from Boston, which Ron couldn't resist asking. I just wanted to get away from the city life, Andrew explained, not going into details. Ron didn't ask for any. He also offered him a job in his logging business, which Andrew happily agreed to. He moved into Ron's guest bedroom, which was on the second floor of his house. The main reason he had been looking for a paying guest wasn't the money. He had plenty of that. It was the company he was looking for, since he had become very lonely since his wife passed away. The two men got along very well, despite their age gap. They weren't just together at home and work, but would spend time going to places together. As Ron had predicted, every girl in the small town could not stop looking at the handsome man. Since Andrew was in his mid-20s, not just girls but even older women would ogle him. Surprisingly, Andrew never seemed interested, which Ron found very odd, considering that every man his age wanted women in their life. It was an early Saturday morning when Ron and Andrew decided to go to the nearby mountains for a hike. Andrew kept his pace slow so that Ron could keep up. They wandered off the track since Ron knew the area well. It was then that they heard the sound of some twigs breaking. Must be a monkey or something, Ron reassured. Andrew smiled at the way Ron was trying to make him feel safe. They heard the same sound again, but this time it was followed by a small sob. The two men looked at each other, understanding that this was not a monkey. They followed the sound of the moans, making sure not to make any sound that would scare away whoever was there. After only a few seconds of walking, they spotted a young girl leaning against a tree with her head resting on her knees, crying uncontrollably. Andrew loved kids, so he ran over to comfort the little girl. She was barely wearing warm clothes, so her entire body was freezing. He picked her up, and the two men rushed home, where they lit a fire in the fireplace and covered her up in all the blankets they could find. Ron cooked up some soup, while Andrew sat beside her, feeding her with a spoon. The moment the soup entered the child's body, and her body became warmer. She fell asleep deeply, as she hadn't slept for ages. Poor child. I wonder what happened to her. I mean, how can a young girl end up in the middle of the forest all alone? Ron wondered. Andrew didn't have an answer for this. He couldn't take his eyes off the girl, who looked like she was 5 or 6 years old. The fire reflected on her beautiful, innocent face, making it glow profoundly. Maybe her parents didn't want her, which is why they abandoned her here, Ron suggested. Andrew sighed. He couldn't imagine someone doing that to their child. He remembered how much he had always wanted a kid, but life had other plans for him. He shook his head, forcing himself to forget the past. That was why he had come here, to get away from everything, from his past, and from the people that existed in it. The two spent the entire day taking care of the young girl. Ron eventually went to his room to sleep at night, but Andrew didn't. He leaned against the sofa the girl was on and slept there so that he could wake up instantly if she needed anything. To his amazement, the young girl had slept through the day and night combined, only waking up for a quick meal or to use the bathroom. The next day, Andrew woke up and saw her sitting in front of him, staring curiously at his face. He could tell by how she was looking that she was feeling much better now. He smiled at her, and she smiled back. "How are you?" he asked, not knowing what to call her. "I'm good. Where did Mama go?" she asked, looking around the house as if she was expecting her mother to show up any time. "She said she's going to come back soon." Andrew smiled. "Can I know your name?" "Molly," she told him without hesitating for a second. Perhaps she understood the role this man had played in saving her life. But whatever the reason was, the two of them and even Ron got along very well. They had informed the local sheriff, who happened to be Ron's friend, and he agreed to let Molly stay with them until they could find her parents. The house that had once been empty was now full of giggles and laughter. A week had gone by, and now Molly was used to living with the two men, although she did miss her mother the entire time. Andrew had fallen in love with the child. It was as if she had given him a new purpose in life. He wanted the best for her to find her parents, but at the same time, he dreaded the idea of her going away. It was inevitable, and one day Ron got a call from the sheriff. "Hey, Ron, we got a missing person report, and the description matches Molly exactly." "The name in the report was Molly as well, so I'm pretty sure it's for this girl," the sheriff told Ron. "All right, I guess this was bound to happen. I'm sure going to miss this little one," he said, looking at Molly and smiling at her. "What do we have to do now?" "Bring her over to the police station. The child's mother was in the hospital in the nearby town, which is why she didn't file the report sooner. She's coming down here for identification." "Okay, I'll bring her down in an hour or so," Ron said, hanging up. He called Andrew and told him the entire situation. Andrew's reaction was a mixed-up one. His lips showed a smile, but his eyes showed tears. Perhaps that was precisely how he was feeling at the moment, happy that Molly would finally get to be with her parents, but sad that she would no longer be with him. At the police station, they got to know the details of the incident. Molly had been on a helicopter with her mother until the helicopter's engine ultimately failed. To save her life, the mother waited for the aircraft to come closer to the ground and then helped the daughter escape first, later keeping herself. As a result, they both landed in different places. Molly escaped unharmed except for a few scratches on her body. On the other hand, her mother hit her head on a tree and lost consciousness. She was rescued by a group of hikers who took her to the nearby hospital, where she stayed for an entire week. The moment she woke up, the first person she had asked for was Molly, and upon finding out that her daughter was missing, she burst into tears. She filed a missing person report as soon as possible, and eventually they could locate Molly in the nearby town. This story left Andrew oddly satisfied, knowing that Molly was greatly loved by her mother. Molly's mother arrived, and both she and Andrew were left in a state of shock. It was Rebecca. Molly's mother was Rebecca, Andrew's high school sweetheart. Andrew and Rebecca had been high school sweethearts who were utterly inseparable. However, life hadn't been easy on them, as Rebecca's father was a business tycoon who disapproved of his daughter dating someone from such a humble background. He opposed their relationship, but Rebecca never listened. One day, Andrew found out that Rebecca had accused him of rape. Andrew didn't stand a chance against the best lawyers her family had hired against him, and consequently, he was sent to jail for a crime he had never committed. 6 years later, he had served his sentence and decided to begin a new life. That brought him to this small town where he finally got a fresh start. But the truth was far different from what Andrew had believed all these years. Rebecca had not accused Andrew of rape. Her father had forced her to do so, threatening to kill Andrew if she did not oblige. He ensured she never contacted Andrew during the trial or even when he was in jail. His plan took a weird turn when he discovered that his daughter Rebecca was pregnant with Andrew's child. Of course, he loved his granddaughter Molly, but he didn't want Andrew to know she existed. When Rebecca's father passed away, she was finally able to find a private investigator to find Andrew. When he told her he was in a small town nearby, she got on her father's helicopter and headed to his location, bringing Molly along to meet her father. That is when the tragic accident occurred, leading to Andrew finding her. When Andrew heard the entire story, he was left in a state of shock. He couldn't believe that all these years he had hated Rebecca when she was loyal, and Molly was his baby. She was his child. The two broke down into tears, hugging each other. Molly also joined the hug, not knowing why both of them were crying. The two got back together, and their beautiful family was back together again. They moved back to the city and began living their beautiful life. Of course, they did not forget Ron, who had become like a grandfather to Molly, making sure they visited him regularly.
Journal entry, Juan's musings. Building from crumbs, one step at a time. What you are about to read is my typical journal account. I have many of these, and if you are here, please take a seat and let me know what you think about my experience. Hi, my name is Juan. I'm 15 years old and in high school. But that's not all about me. My family migrated to the U.S. when I was 5, and we have been here since. When I say family, I mean my dad, because he's the only one I've grown to know, and he's the only one who cared for me. Other people have moms and understand them, but for some reason mine hasn't surfaced all my life, and my dad wouldn't have a conversation about it. When I asked, he'd say, "Remember, do not focus on the love you seem to be missing. I am always here." Sometime in the future, I hope to get to the root of the family tree and learn about my mom, but that's not what this story is about. Today, I'll write down my account and one incident that taught me that it is wrong to be judgmental. My father didn't get a formal education, so getting a job was difficult. But we always managed ourselves. Sometimes he works part-time jobs, and other times he takes lawn mowing gigs. And he always has something to eat, no matter what. This is what encouraged me to aim for a higher education. My father didn't go to the university or get a certification that could help our family, but I will work hard to take care of him when he is old. To save for my university and help with some bills, I work construction, help my father whenever he has multiple gigs, and maintain a reading timetable of about 6 hours of studying every day. Many people call me a good boy and say my father is lucky to have me, but I don't think so. We are fortunate to have each other, and if studying hard and helping my father is what I have to do to get a decent life, why not? My grandma always says that when life hands you a crumb, pile it up and build a fortress with it. I am making a fortress, one piece at a time, with the crumbs I've been handed. The PS Store. Dad, I want a PS5. What did you say? Dad said. Living my life the way I mentioned above made it very awkward to tell my dad I wanted a PS5. First, we couldn't afford it. I would have to use up months of savings to get it. And we didn't even have a TV. My dad looked at me perplexed, having many questions in his mind and wondering if I started getting high. Juan, what do you want a PS5 for? He didn't add, but I could see in his eyes that we couldn't afford it. He was right, we couldn't, but I had to try and was a few dollars short. So not only were we going to the PS5 store, but I also needed to give him some money. When I insisted, he was even more worried. I gave him my money and begged him to do me the honors. After minutes of pleading, he agreed, especially after I told him why I needed the PS5. I could see a flicker of pride and joy in his eyes. The questions ceased, and we left for the store together. Purchase botched. We were fortunate because we got the last PS5 in the store. Someone might have gotten it before us if we had come later. I was thrilled. My dad bought and paid for the PS5, but wrote the receipt in my name. It made me even happier. As we were about to leave the store, a white lady came in. Shortly after, she came charging at us at the door. "Hey, I was told the last PS5 was sold to Mexicans. Are you the one?" I innocently answered yes. Then she blocked my dad's truck and said she couldn't let us go. My dad is very quiet, but his English is wrong, and people often misunderstand him. He tried to ask her to leave his way, but one thing led to another, and before I knew it, they were arguing. As they exchanged words, I noticed that she wanted my PS5 and offered some money, but I needed it, and taking her money would mean trying out of town to get another, or returning weeks later. So my dad refused her money and asked her to go. Thinking and writing about it now, I remember how hurtful it was when I heard her say, "Oh, you will give it to me. I am white, and I have the privilege. You don't belong here. You can go back to Mexico for all I care." At that point, I knew there was no going back. She approached me, landed a slap on my cheek, and started pulling the PS5 from the back seat. I grabbed it. Then she let loose and fell down on her back. In the jail. The next thing I know, we are in the police station. A thing or two were said, but mainly containing words like assault, stealing, Mexicans. We have had many experiences like this before, but how they alleged stealing? And why? We bought the PS5 ourselves, so how is that stealing? The police officers wouldn't listen to us, though. I learned the white woman's name was Karen. She wanted the PS5 for her grandson, who was celebrating his birthday, and it meant a lot to her because he wanted a PS5, and his parents weren't there for him. Her grandson's name was James. My best friend's name was James too, and he also had a birthday that same day. So I felt pain and decided to let her have it. I had bought the PS5 for my best friend James, the noble cause that had made my dad proud of me. But if I lose it now, I could apologize and make it up to him later. My dad started speaking and trying to explain to me that I'm a good boy, and I always helped him work in construction and save up money for the university. He went on and on about how I want the PS5 for my friend and why he supported me. His English was poor, but I don't think it mattered. The police went on and on about how they could not allow us to go with the PS5 because they weren't sure it was ours, and worst of all, they decided they must detain us until they found out if we stole it or not. This is the craziest part. They allowed Karen to go with the PS5 and left us in the detention center overnight. The police officer acted that way because he knew Karen and her son. I didn't allow her to pay me anything for the PS5, and since I had already paid for it, she left. So while Karen was allowed to go with the PS5, she didn't pay because she is white. My dad and I were made to stay in detention because they couldn't ascertain whether or not we stole the PS5, which Karen just left with. Worse, it appeared as if we would spend the night there. I was disappointed and sad that I couldn't give James the PS5 he had so much wanted and that we had to sleep in detention. But I was Mexican. Things like this happened, no consequences. The police officer also went home to spend the night with his family. James's birthday. Karen returned and presented the PS5 birthday present she had obtained for him. James was pleased to have the gift, but he was also sad that all his friends were around except his best friend, who was not answering his phone. Karen asked him not to worry. Karen's James had a lovely party, danced and had fun. So later, at around 11 a.m., the boys decided to play some games, and James decided to open his PS5 present. To his shock, my name was on the receipt. Couldn't comprehend what was happening, so he called his grandma and said, "This is my best friend's name. Why is the receipt for my gift in his name? Did he give it to you?" So it turns out Karen's James is also my James. As crazy as it sounds, we were both fighting to keep the PS5 for the same person. However, My dad and I were in detention for that. James was furious and threatened to involve his dad, a high-ranking police officer, if we weren't released. I'm sorry and thank. They called the police officer who detained us, and he insisted that we had to stay there till morning. He was at home with his family and no one could tell him to leave. Of course, no one could except James's dad intervened. James could not bear the thought what they had done to us, so he called his dad. We were released from the detention center at around 1 a.m. My back ached and my dad was sad. It was at that point we started receiving the sorry and thank. Karen was deeply sorry and ashamed about how she treated us. She knelt down to apologize and told us she allowed racism to cloud her judgment and acted like a horrible person. The police officer also apologized. He even said when he got home and his wife asked how his day went, he had referred to us as some Mexicans doing shit. He always believed that he wasn't racial, but he allowed his trust in Karen to blind him from doing what was right. James hugged me and apologized. My dad and I were sad and highly stressed, but we forgave them. We had many experiences like this before, and we only hope people will do better and treat others properly, regardless of their skin color, age, or origin. Karen's grandma invited us to the house to have dinner and get to know each other better. Okay, that was one hell of a story, and I finished writing 3 journal pages. But some stories must be told, no matter how long or how sad they make us feel. I wanted to document this so I will never forget that life is made of circles. In an extensive process, tables could turn quickly, and lives could easily be affected. Reflecting on this now, I can see that it is wrong to judge a person before getting to know them, or take sides without truly hearing both sides of a story. If I could do anything differently, I would stop myself from getting sad. That's all. But if Karen and the police officer could act differently, I bet they would do a lot. Nugget for the day. Race is just a social construct. It doesn't matter where we are from or how we got here. A reasonable person is good regardless of origin. An evil person will be wrong, whether white, black, Asian, or Mexican. It doesn't matter. It is indeed possible for some Mexicans to have stolen or hurt others, but that is their personality. It has nothing to do with race, because there are many Mexicans like my dad who are living decent lives and me. Anyway, enough story for the day. Did you enjoy it? I hope my next journal entry will be full of fun and joy. A white cop, popularly known as Officer Abby, lived in a prominent city. She has a bad relationship with his teenage daughter. The daughter despises the father due to his racist acts, belief in segregation, and lack of love for all races. He has stopped paying her, the daughter's tuition fees on time as he used to, justifying his actions that the reason for the late payments is to serve as a threat to his daughter, so that she could believe in his philosophy that whites are superior to blacks, which he has proven over time. Officer Abby rarely drops cash for his wife as well, either to cook or sort bills, but instead prefers to go out with the boys to drink and only comes home at late hours. Hence, his wife takes him for granted and often regards him as a loser. Officer Abby, being a typical racist, however, wasn't birthed so. He developed a rare hatred during his tender days as he grew up. He used to love and see everyone equally, irrespective of race or complexion, just like it should be. Still, he developed a rapt hatred for blacks immediately after his only brother was assassinated in cold blood by a black rogue. According to the reports, the brother was a drug dealer and smuggler and worked with a gang. He failed to meet his boss's demands, leading to his murder. Ever since then, Officer Abby had wrapped up his anger and vengeance, channeled them towards all blacks, and saw them as one tree that bears the same fruit. Thus, he passionately hated blacks and blamed them for the death of his brother. On the other end is a beautiful and intelligent young black girl named Keisha. Keisha is a student of one of the prominent high schools in the city, and she has a lovable personality. She is known for her charisma, kind gestures, and respect towards elders and colleagues, especially in her school. Keisha is the only child of both her parents. She's a lover of pets, especially dogs and parrots. Her favorite subject is linguistics. Did I forget that she's multilingual, as Keisha can speak over 4 international languages? Pardon me, Keisha has basic knowledge of Hindi, while she can speak fluidly the other 3 languages: English, Spanish, and French. Keisha is a lover of music and enjoys reading in a cool place. One of her favorite spots for reading is the park. She loves to be around great minds. Her mentors are Alice Walton, the wealthiest woman in the United States, and Powell Alexander Janalis, a Canadian polyglot. He made it to the Guinness World Records in 1985 for fluency in 42 languages. Keisha's best philosophy is that as a person, your existence is to be the reason someone smiles, the reason someone feels loved and believes in the goodness in people. And every day, she tends to live her life focusing on that philosophy. She hopes that someday she will have her footprints in the sands of time. The sacrifice Keisha made for a colleague some months ago in school, who, although detested her, made her well known in school, and the account cannot be forgotten in the minds of the eyewitnesses. A fast flashback to the event. It was an exam day. Keisha's unpopular foe, Rachel, was sick, and because she failed to inform the appropriate authorities before the exam time, she was to fail the exam as the invigilators could not accept if someone had to take the exam for her. Rachel, groaning in pain as she complained of severe tummy upset, pleaded with her friends to help her exam, but they all declined because they had the same paper to write and blamed the limited time given, as it won't bring enough to write for two. Surprisingly, an unknown voice uttered, "I will help you with your paper," from behind. Guess whose voice? It was Keisha's. The least expected person, as she also had the same paper within the limited space Rachel's friends lamented about. Although this act would affect her score, as she would have to split the exam duration, Keisha did as promised and wrote a paper for two, since it was permitted. The act popularized Keisha all over the school, and people began to call her God's Own, as she amused even the cold-hearted, and they believed that only a godsend would sacrifice that much for someone like Rachel. The latter detested her for no reasonable course. Her teacher later compensated her for her goodness. On a fateful day, Abby and Keisha encountered each other at a park. It happens that Keisha is sitting in the garden, reading her book, when one white woman calls the police, saying that Keisha looks suspicious and might be a thief, as she is a young black girl. The cop who came to attend the emergency was Officer Abby, who lived near the park, and began questioning her. Many of the questions asked were unprofessional and irrelevant. Still, Keisha, being a civil and calm person, attended to every question, leaving no room for excuses that might warrant the cop to have her arrested. She explained to the officer that she was a high school student and of excellent reputation. She only came to the park to read since it was much easier to assimilate in such a perfect environment. She explained further that she could take Officer Abby to her house to prove her innocence, should he still doubt her identity. Everything turned out fine, and the officer detected the allegations against Keisha by the white woman were false, as she was only at the park to read and attend to her homework. But Officer Abby was mad because he couldn't find anything on her, and she seemed just innocent, as he didn't want to let go of her because she was a black girl. So he began to scream at her for no reason. The whole situation got shitty that poor Keisha, who had become tense and scared off by Officer Abby's overreaction, began to sob profusely. Officer Abby queried her for breathing heavily, as he explained that heavy breathing could cause feelings of anxiety and panic. This can, in turn, make it even harder to draw a breath. He accused Keisha of planning to pass out, and in turn, implicated him for her misfortune. He called out some sections of laws, backing up the consequences of involving an officer of the law. Eventually, Officer Abby declared that he would have to arrest Keisha for sobbing too loud and breathing heavily. He successfully stopped her, and the white woman who had summoned Officer Abby was standing on her balcony, applauding him for a job well done. The appraisal from the woman got into Officer Abby's head, and he decided to go even more extreme, as he concluded to put Keisha in detention. He did this gladly because she was black. As they approached the police, Keisha respectfully asked that she take her notebooks and backpack to the police station, as the pack contains her books, jotters, research works, and more, as they are still vital to her. Still, Officer Abby got angrier and deprived her of her fundamental human right because she was black. In anger, he lashed out, "You, this low-life black, I don't care about you, and I don't give a damn what is vital to you or not. And any further word from you will attract a dirty slap. He then collected her notes, threw them in the trash, and took her to the station. She was detained in police custody, and her parents were not allowed to speak to her for days. She wasn't granted an opportunity for bail, even as a week passed. However, Officer Abbey didn't know the gravity of what he did until a Friday night. He had planned to have a wonderful dinner with his daughter and wife after a long time, as he had just gotten his salary. As he got home, he found something strange. The daughter was crying to her mom because she could not pass the exam for college. Officer Abbey became furious that his daughter had failed her paper and disappointed him as he bragged about his daughter to his friends. On the other hand, the curious mother was relatively calm and asked why she had failed, because she knew she was a very bright and intelligent youngster. The girl sobbed as she explained the primary cause of her ordeal. Although she was intelligent, she elaborated that a young black colleague had always helped her through her studies, and her name was Keisha. Still, for the past week, she had not been able to get through to her, as she had not been responding to her messages. And the worst part of the tragedy is that the books in which she jots all her works were found torn and tattered by rain. She must have discovered this when she went to look for her at the park after several attempts to reach her had failed. This gave her a heads up that Keisha wasn't avoiding her, but probably something terrible had happened to her. At this point, it dawned on Officer Abbey that he was the sole contributor to his daughter's failure in the college exam, and the primary reason why the poor daughter might have to retake the college exam if the university eventually denied her admission. He didn't utter a word, as he knew the wife and daughter would never forgive him for his silly mistake. He immediately excused himself that he had a job to attend to at the station and rushed to the cell. Keisha was locked in, and right there he set her free. After a few weeks, Officer Abbey's daughter got an envelope from the university. The letter entails her chances of admission, and as she reads it, it says that she didn't pass the exam. Thus, she has to retake the college exam in the next session. Auspiciously, there was only one girl who got a full scholarship from the university, and that was Keisha, as a piece of information reached the university that she was absent from the college exam for critical reasons. Hence, she was judged based on her previous academic performances and attestations from her colleagues. The moral of the story is that no matter how you treat gold, it maintains its status and remains gold. As you can see in the case of Keisha, she became a conqueror and achieved her goal despite all odds. Do you wonder what her plan was? That fateful day, she went to the park to read and prepare for her forthcoming college exam. Unfortunately, the unexpected occurred, but she could still gain admission into university, this time on a platter of gold. Furthermore, we were created in either black or white to show God's uniqueness, neither for discrimination nor segregation. It would help if you didn't relate with anyone based on the belief that your race or color is superior. No stain is better than the other. The moment you take offense or decisions because of color, you become like Officer Abbey, a sentimental and biased person. Colors don't count. Great personality does. You have seen that in the case of Keisha. If she had not built a great character, her colleagues would have attested the contrary about her, and of course, she wouldn't have gotten admission. In a nutshell, being black or white didn't earn her entry. Her character did. It was the 17th of July, just past 7 p.m. Andy was devastated. His mother, Pauline, had just broken the unfortunate news that his father had left her for someone else sexier. This meant that she no longer had a husband, and that more importantly to poor Andy, he no longer had a father. Throughout the rest of July, he struggled with depression and came extremely close to giving up. The realization that he had lost the father figure that had always been exceptionally important to him was finally kicking in. All those fond memories of their time together suddenly flooded him. That one time they were fishing, Andy fell in the lake because the fish overpowered him. Thrashing at football, and all those times his father came home drunk and became violent. In Andy's mind, these drunken fits of rage were always brushed off as occasional outbursts because of a stress-filled life. Due to his autism, Andy was vastly intelligent, and while he rightly took his autism in stride, and correctly viewed it as a strength rather than a weakness, it had always led to two significant problems. The first was not being able to pick up on certain things, which is why he never realized until now that his father was a violent and selfish man. Secondly, he suffered from social anxiety, and difficulty with making friends plagued him. He admired many people and shared similar interests, but ultimately struggled to connect with them because of how shy and overwhelmed he could suddenly get. As a result of this, he was hit even harder by his father's actions, as he had no friends to rely on and be comforted by. Andy's mother, Pauline, was aware of this, and despite her being upset, she bought Andy an invaluable gift to try and comfort him in any way possible: a laptop. Her reasoning was not only to ensure that Andy had something to occupy his time and prevent boredom, but it was also a new way for him to find friends and socialize online. She hoped communicating online would help him feel less shy when approaching people, and it seemed to initially take away the immense pain he was experiencing, which was great. He quickly created an Instagram, Facebook, and Discord page to meet new people. All was seemingly swimmingly, but people began to laugh at him and send hateful messages because of who he was. Andy had never owned a laptop before, so he didn't know what he was doing. This led to situations like him messaging his mother, but accidentally sending these messages into open posts and public forums, leading to humiliation. Things worsened when he told these people about his new idea for a fledgling startup project. "You'll never achieve anything, you absolute fucking cretin. Not in a trillion years. Might as well quit while you're ahead. It saves you wasting your time and us laughing when you fail." These horrible, offensive, spiteful insults were hurled at Andy, shaking him to his core. This deeply affected Andy so much. As a result, he ended up spending August in isolation. However, this could benefit him as it provided vital time to work on something. Fueled by the anguish that he still felt because of his father, he worked hard on creating a program to simulate human behavior. Why did he do this? He wanted to ensure that in the future, he wouldn't have to suffer from bullying or missing a cue, because using his program, getting to know people and reading their emotions and thoughts would be a lot easier. December 1st rolled around, and Andy was starting to communicate with more and more people. He took the newfound knowledge from previous experiences with people online, and now made sure to send his mom messages more privately. He tried to find interests in people similar to his, and created engaging and meaningful conversations out of them. He noted these topics of interest and other aspects of the individuals, and put them into his algorithm. Based on the results, he'd know whether they were compatible with him, which was reassuring. To the shock of Andy and Pauline, the program had grown rapidly in popularity over the past few months, and Andy became rich and famous as a result of this just within a few months. His dad caught wind of this and wanted to become a part of their lives again, but they weren't gullible or stupid. Far from it. In fact, ironically, Pauline ran her husband through the algorithm, and even it determined that he was completely unreliable. Andy's father tried his best to worm his way back in, but Pauline and Andy were fed up with these desperate and pitiful cries, so they moved away to a new address so they would no longer need to be disturbed. The flights were booked, and Edinburgh, Scotland, was set firmly in their sights. The most exciting aspect of this was similar for Andy and his mother. Andy had a friend called Levi on Discord and lived in Berwick-upon-Tweed, which is quite close, whereas his mom had a handsome man named Rodriguez. While managing the algorithm for company, Andy, he just so happened to live in Edinburgh again. It was now mid-December, and everything was great. Andy and his mom were living thanks to the immense success of the program comfortably. Although it was a cold December's Eve, Andy felt like shopping and exploring Edinburgh, which was still relatively unfamiliar to him. It was a frigid night, the city barren and ominous. As the snow began to fall and the trees glistened, he was starstruck. An excellent sight was gracing his eyes. Among the trees was a little gift shop with intriguing and aesthetically appealing lights illuminating its exterior. He was so intrigued by these lights that he strolled up to the shop and looked into the front window. It turned out to be a pawn shop. Andy had been looking for Christmas gifts, so he thought it'd be at least worth a punt to browse this shop. Knocking the door several times, he noticed a slight, frail silhouette slowly making its way to the door. "How can I help you, young man?" passionately spoke the elderly gentleman. Andy explained he was looking for a nice Christmas gift. The gentleman led him to the technology section and the assortment of phones. He had amassed quite a collection of brand new phones. "I'll take a few, kind sir." He smiled at the gentleman as he knew what he would ask next. "How many is a few, young man?" Andy continued to smile, thinking of the happiness that this would bring. 173, please." A few days later, and it was the 26th of December, 2018. Christmas had come and gone. Pauline had met a new man called Dan while he was working as their business manager. He proposed to her on Christmas Day. While Andy was initially quite skeptical, he passed the reliability test, the only evidence needed to prove that Dan was perfect for Pauline. Being in such a positive mood, due to the thought of him and his mom finally being truly happy again, he started to wrap up the 173 iPhones. As bizarre as it sounds, this number wasn't random. Andy had noted every person that previously said kind things, stuck up for him, and was overall a good friend to him. Now that he was living comfortably, successfully, he wanted to spread a little Christmas cheer and give something back to the people who genuinely cared. Luckily, the iPhone boxes were only so small that he could fit all 173 into his mom's car boot, and they drove to the post office together. They were all sent off to be delivered to multiple addresses. To show this appreciation for his true friends, he wrote a heartwarming message on the back of each of the 173 parcels. It read, "To my best friend from the unknown, I hope this gift brings you some happiness. If so, I will be happy." He originally intended for the parcel to be anonymous. Giving back was all that mattered to him personally. Them knowing about it was irrelevant. Unfortunately, though, Andy forgot to tell the post office this while providing the iPhone cases. Ultimately, his name and address were unintentionally plastered on the back of the parcels. It was now New Year's Day. Andy, his mother, and his new stepfather, Terry. He had just booked his holiday from work. A client was asking for numbers and book for his business accounts to be sorted out, but it was New Year's Day, and all that mattered to him was family. They were chatting amongst themselves until a knock at the door. They lived in rural Scotland. They had to drive 30 miles to reach the nearest post office, so a knock at the door, it wasn't heard of. Terry got up, curious as to who it was on the other side of the door. It was a courier with a parcel. It was from one of the addresses Andy sent an iPhone. It turned out to be the same package, unopened. Somehow the note had managed to stay firmly attached. It said, "Andy, you left your address visible, you donut. Thanks for the sweet message, though I don't want an iPhone. Being your friend is all I need. Love, Davina. P.S. I live nearby. Meet me at the old Hitchington Lake on the 5th of January at noon." He boarded the bus around 1 p.m., chilled and ready to meet Davina. As the bus drove, he noticed small cottages, a barrage of wildlife, and a surprisingly dry Scottish day. He loved the atmosphere, mainly striking ambience that was somewhat comforting. The bus arrived at 1:30, which was good, as he wanted to practice his social skills and be prepared. Standing by the river, he noticed a partially broken swing. Usually he would stay clear of this, but he needed the confidence to speak to Davina, so he decided to live a little. It was fun at first, but then the rope dwindled, and within seconds it snapped, and he fell directly into the lake. When the fishing incident happened with his dad, he was okay, because he was with someone, but this time he was on his own. And swimming to safety wasn't an option, because he didn't know how to. It all seemed over, and just as he started to flail and struggle, a faint voice was audible. Suddenly, a young girl of a similar age to Andy dived into the river and grabbed him. She guided him out of the water and saved him. He was shaken, but he was still alive. "You saved me." "Andy, I told you to meet me by the river, not in the river." As if it were destiny, Davina and Andy quickly grew to like each other. Love at first sight. Andy endured a challenging year, but he had gained a new family against all of the seemingly impossible odds. Not one new addition, but two. It was a cold winter evening, and silence was spread all around. A chilling breeze was blowing through the trees. George, a 17-year-old black teenager, was standing in the middle of the graveyard where his father was buried. He remembered just a day ago how different his life was. His father was with him. They talked and laughed while working, and suddenly there was nothing. His life has suddenly come to an abrupt halt, and the emptiness. He felt like the purpose of his life was vanishing in the air. The sound of his father's words, laughter, advice, screams, everything was still ringing in his ears, and that dark face with the light of love and innocence was still in front of his eyes. Tears were falling from his eyes, but his expressions were bleak. Why? That single word was haunting him ever since his father's demise. He wanted to crush the whole world, scream his lungs out, scratch the grave, and take his father back. But his face of him and the innocent smile, there till the very end, was holding him back. He was the one who should be killed, not his father. Then why? He wanted to be killed along with him, but not yet. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, he remembered his father once told him. He nodded in denial and fell to the ground on his knees. That bullet didn't kill me, Dad, but it didn't make me strong either. Why did you do that, Dad? You deprived me of all those hopes which I have built. What should I do now? I am lost. I have no idea what to do. Guide me. I am in pain. I am in pain, he murmured with a broken voice. And in response, no voice came except the rustling of leaves and branches. But in the back of his mind, he knew what his father would have said at this moment, like he always used to say. Always remember, my son, this pain, this life, these hardships, these people, everything is temporary. Don't let them get in your way and affect you. Your kind behavior, your kind words, and all those good deeds you have done for people will be the only thing of worth. He sniffled and rubbed his eyes. You got to get up and make sure not to give up on yourself, even if there is no one to keep your back steady. You are my pride, son. You are the hope for your mother and sister after me. Will you promise me to look after me? Yes, Dad, I will. He remembered their conversation after his father was diagnosed with cancer. Those past statements strengthened him and encouraged him to do what was right and what he promised. Wiping his face, sending some last prayers towards heaven, he moved towards the exit, walking past the empty junkyard near his home, where his father used to work, reminded him of those good days when he learned a lot of new things. They would laugh together and discuss the complications of life. He used to show him fundamental moral values and human worth through his acts. The way he treated, talked, worked, and behaved with people and animals around him was the model he had always followed for years. Not even a single person in his life had any complaint to him. Everyone respected him due to his upright character and kind nature. He used to teach his son about work ethics and management so that he would be appreciated among people just as he was. When he entered the small home with a shabby interior, it was dark outside. His mother was lying on the bed, looking at the roof blankly. Silent tears were leaving the corners of her eyes and falling on the pillow. His little sister wept while hugging the only photo they had of their father. When his mother noticed George entering the room, her silence broke and turned into muffled, painful cries. She got up from bed and hugged her son. I knew sooner or later we would be separated from your father, since he had cancer. and I prepared for myself for that day. But yesterday's incident broke all my expectations. George wasn't prepared for that. She cried on his shoulder. No one was, Mom, he whispered while crying back. I never thought the cause of your father's death could be anything other than cancer. He did nothing wrong to anyone. Why did he kill my Ray? He was a cop. He was supposed to be with justice. How could he kill a person? He will be punished for what he did. I will make sure of that. Rage and fire were burning in his eyes. The whole incident playing in his mind again and again. His father, unfortunately, developed societal cancer of racism, hatred, and greed. This cancer is far worse than any cancer. Since he buried his father this morning, he had decided to fight for his father's rights against the societal cancer of racism and corruption. He determined to take Lieutenant Schwan Cooper to the gallows for his heinous crime and had enough evidence. A day before, a blue tow truck entered the junkyard premises, and before it could go any further, an officer from inside the place came and motioned Mr. Raymond was in the driving seat to stop the vehicle and come down. George was sitting on the passenger seat beside his father, observed the unusual activity. They both came out of the car and went to the officer, standing all proud and straight with raised eyebrows. George looked around and found no worker was there in the junkyard. That was strange because usually everyone was around this time in the morning. Out of nowhere, an assistant officer, besides the lieutenant, stepped forward and handcuffed Mr. Raymond without questioning or charges. This action caused a sudden panic and shock for both Mr. Raymond and George. "What are you doing?" George asked the sergeant, who was pushing and pinning down his father and putting on cuffs forcefully. "Sir, can you please tell me what I have done to deserve this behavior?" Raymond asked the lieutenant while trying to cooperate with Sergeant. "Shut up, you drug-selling moron. You want to talk? We'll talk in jail." The lieutenant spoke curtly, making them anxious about what was happening. "Sir, you must have some sort of misunderstanding. I have never been associated with drugs in any way, let alone sold them to someone." Raymond explained himself to the lieutenant. Meanwhile, the sergeant moved to the truck, took out a nylon bag and underneath his jacket, and threw it inside the car. Unfortunately, George saw him throwing it. "Hey, Dad, what are you doing? What did you throw inside?" George tried to get his father's attention and looked suspiciously at the sergeant. "Oh, we must be misunderstood? Really?" The lieutenant continued the conversation, stopping Mr. Raymond from looking behind and listening to his son. "We have got the tip that you are a drug dealer. Check the truck, sir." "Wait a minute, sir. I saw your officer throwing a nylon bag inside." George spoke more loudly to get everyone's attention this time. A floating expression of contempt appeared on the lieutenant's face, but he hid it perfectly. Raising an eyebrow, he confidently addressed, "That was a nice trick to distract us, but I'm not a fool. Check the truck, Sergeant." "I'm not using any tricks. Sir, I saw this man." "Sir, a packet is found." A sergeant came with a brown cuboid packet cut from the center, revealing boxes of drugs inside. The glint of cunningness in his eyes as he achieved his goal. "You found? You liar! You put it there yourself!" George lashed out, not believing what was happening. "George, calm down. Let me talk." Mr. Raymond tried to hold back George with cuffed hands. "Hey, you, the tiny little bug of a drug seller. How dare you call my officer a liar? You want to get arrested along with your father?" "My father did nothing wrong, and you have no right to arrest him. Your sergeant throws the nylon bag before my eyes, and he's lying." The lieutenant came near George and, looking right into his eyes, spoke as if challenging him. "Do you have any evidence to prove what you saw?" And at that moment, George knew it was all planned. But what he couldn't understand was why they were doing it. Mr. Raymond, who had been observing the lieutenant's disgust towards him, understood very well why they were trying to do it. You have planned this all yourself?" "Why?" George asked. "George, stop this. You must be mistaken." Raymond tried to close the argument because he didn't want George to face the consequences of any situation. "Me? Did what?" Lieutenant asked with a smirk. "How could you do that? You are an embodiment of justice. Why are you playing this illegal act and blaming it an innocent person?" George couldn't believe it because the world was too simple for him. "First thing, we are not answerable to any of your foolish questions. Secondly, if you said one more word against us, you will also be arrested." "You can't take him. I will tell everyone you are a fraud and a cheater," George shouted while the sergeant was dragging his father to the police car. "Sure, tell if you lived that long." The lieutenant laughed and took his revolver and pointed it towards George. George was at his wit's end, suddenly pushed to the ground, and heard a shot. Moments later, he saw his father lying on the floor with blood oozing from his chest. Everyone went still for a moment, and when the realization hit them, they went into action. George was crying and trying to talk with his father, who was lying unconscious. The lieutenant immediately called the control room and sent a message to the station. "One culprit found in drug selling died in an encounter in junkyard situated north of Finkel Street. Send the Team 3 for immediate inspection." 1 week later, Sean Cooper, a son of a famous business tycoon, Albert Cooper, who served as a lieutenant, is being dragged to prison after a hearing in the courtroom. According to sources, it was proved through evidence that he murdered Raymond Harrison and allegedly blamed him for drug selling and falsifying the evidence. As per charges against him, he has been deprived of his position and badge, and the court sentenced him to life imprisonment. A news reporter outside the courtroom was speaking on the television in a small house where Mrs. Raymond and her children were sitting. They were watching the news and shedding tears on the justice provided to their departed soul of Raymond Harrison. Furthermore, it has been come to notice that evidence was provided by the son of Raymond Harrison, named George Harrison, in the form of a videotape recorded from the black box of an unidentified car in the junkyard where the victim's body was investigated. The confessionary statement of ex-Sergeant Billy Wright clarified evidence, which explained that all those allegations against Raymond Harrison were nothing but a pre-planned execution due to racial hatred and greed for promotion. Court has sentenced him to 7 years of imprisonment for hiding the fact and causing hindrance in justice. The censored evidence video was being broadcast on the news. George turned off the television and served the food on the small table where they were all sitting. "Come on, let's have these banana pancakes in the memory of Dad." Just when they were going to eat, a black car stopped outside their home, and a well-suited older man entered their home. George welcomed him inside and offered him a seat. He looked around their small house and then introduced himself. "I am Albert Cooper. My condolences will not be sufficient for your loss, but I would like to apologize and compensate for your loss. I am sorry to say this, but you cannot bring our father back, and you do not need to apologize. What your son did wasn't your fault," George replied. "I know I can't bring your father back, but since, due to the ill nature of my son, you lost your father, the least I can do is to make sure you live a good life. And for that reason, I would like to give your family my whole wealth. We appreciate your concern, but we don't want all this aid. My children and I will be able to manage through thick and thin, so you don't have to worry about that," Mrs. Raymond replied humbly. "Look, Mrs. Raymond, I insist. That way a burden from my heart will be lessened a bit. I believe it was my responsibility to keep a check on my son, but unfortunately I couldn't. Now, in compensation for that, I want to see your children brought up under good care. That way I can die with a little ease, at least. Consider it an appeal of an older man with little time to live. In the end, good deeds are all that matters." George looked into his eyes at once. Those were the exact words his father used to say. Something pulled inside his heart, and he slightly nodded his head in acceptance. Mrs. Raymond wasn't expecting this from him, but stayed silent. While seeing Mr. Albert off, the only thing in George's mind was that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, one way or another. This is what life is, unpredictable.